مجلس عوام انگلستان، بحث پارلمانی درباره دموکراسی و آزادی در ایران، حقوق پایه اشرف ۳ و لیست گذاری سپاه پاسداران. 12 بهمن 1402.
And I beg to move that this House condemns unreservedly the actions of the government of Iran and the violent conduct of the police in suppressing protests in that country. We are deeply concerned over Tehran's growing use of terrorism, espionage, cyber attacks and hostage-taking diplomacy, which restricts and eliminates the Iranian democratic opposition. The National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, targeted in particular members of the organised opposition, namely the PMOI, (MEK), both in اشرف 3, Albania, and the NCRI gatherings since 2018. A resistance that is struggling for establishment of a secular democratic republic and calls on European governments, especially the government of Albania, to counter Tehran's illegal activities and uphold the rights of members of the Iranian opposition in accordance with the 1951 Geneva Refugee Convention, the European Convention of Human Rights and international law, and urges the government to include Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on the list of proscribed terrorist organisation and calls upon his government to work with international counterparts to ensure that further sanctions are placed on Iran without delay and Iran is held to account for its illegal activities at home and abroad. But the urgency for this charge is now more relevant than ever. Not only does the human rights situation in Iran remain absolutely dire, the uncertainty around the Middle East and spreading further afield at a rapid rate is predominantly driven by the funding and support from this exceptionally threatening, conniving and deceitful regime. I'll give way to my honourable friend. Because the IRGC literally run and rule Iran, they disregard democracy, freedom of expression and the basic human rights. The majority of people live in fear to speak out or engage in political matters in any form, with vigorous covert intelligence deployed to all parts of the country, seeking to sift out any potential opposition which may pose a threat to the regime. The authorities censor all media, jamming satellite TV channels, filtering and blocking social media platforms such as X, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and YouTube. Further, the authorities shut off or disrupt the internet and mobile phone networks, particularly during protests. That's to suppress mobilisation and hide from civilians the sheer scale of the violations and privacy breaches taken by the security forces. Now, following the riots, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Iran, Javed Rahman, raised an alarm about the concerning trend of arbitrary arrests, detentions and executions targeting individuals for merely exercising their freedom of expression. Now, recently released figures, of which I'm sure will have been generously tainted by the regime, that in 2023 alone, 870 executions took place, a 30% increase on the previous year. Many of these were women and children. Tens of thousands of political prisoners, the overwhelming majority being peaceful, have been arrested.
On the despicable, brutal regime that there is in Iran, would you agree with me that the brutal regime is literally on an execution spree at the moment, having executed more than 350 protesters and dissidents since the conflict in Gaza began? That is a rate of execution now at not far off 100 protesters per month. So would he agree that it is far long overdue now that the UK and our partners must demand that the UN Human Rights Council dispatches an international fact-finding mission to Iran to visit the regime's prisoners, to meet with political prisoners and detain protesters, so we can finally actually shine a global light on what is happening in Iran? And of course he's right that the IRGC should be proscribed.
I've had the privilege to visit اشرف 3 on a number of occasions. The museum on the site exceptionally depicts the long struggle the people have endured, with brutal attacks and massacres occurring all too frequently. In Albania, the regime's claws continue to menace the people. The IRGC have repeatedly targeted the Albanian government through cyber attacks, disinformation and terror attacks. I'm saddened that on occasion, most notably in June last year, the camp was raided by the Albanian police forces. I'm almost certain that this attack was founded on false claims generated by the IRGC. Their continued attacks on cyber systems are used as a so-called warning to the government. Now, I urge the Albanian government to stand up to these threats. No country should infringe their morals for fear of such a corrupt and wicked enemy. This is a time for Western allies to stick together and stand up to malicious terror acts. And I'm glad that the delegation will be going to Albania shortly, and I hope they'll raise this issue. So I hope the Minister will assure the House that he will offer support to our Albanian counterparts, encouraging them to stand up to the regime and protect the rights of those in that camp who've already experienced too much brutality. Now, the debate comes today when the world has never been so unsafe. We have a war raging in Europe, attacks by the Houthis in the Red Sea, an illegal war in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, war in Syria, amongst other dangerous militant groups. The one thing that combines all of these is the IRGC. They stand as the head of the snake, funding, training and supplying weaponry to all these organisations. Now, the regime in Iran not only ignites a threat to the international community, perhaps but most concerningly to the domestic security of the United Kingdom. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
And he's quite right that we heard from the Director General of MI5 and then the head of counter-terrorism policing last year that they had intervened to disrupt up to 15 kidnapping and assassination attempts coming from Iran here within the UK. And it's why, actually, the argument for prescription is such a powerful one. This would not be merely symbolic, it would be about granting the security services and police forces here in the UK additional powers to truly dismantle any foothold that the IRGC has here in the UK that's allowing them to facilitate those assassination attempts, which we absolutely have to close down. Does he agree with me that that is why prescription would be so important?
I would just say that the position here is the Iranian government are funding professional gangs to inflict attacks and violence on individuals in this country, and they have no mercy or morals as to how far they'll go. A Spanish politician and renowned vocalist against the regime was shot outside his home by a criminal gang employed by the IRGC. We must not allow these despicable attacks to occur on domestic soil. Now, I myself was the subject and target of the Iranian regime, along with several colleagues back in 2016. We attended the annual gathering of the NCRI, with delegations from almost every major democracy, but an Iranian diplomat tried to bomb the conference. He had the audacity to smuggle the explosive, the bomb through security in diplomatic bags. So, the key point here is the current policy on Iran is not working. Their influence is stretching across the Middle East and further. It's time to look for an alternative solution, and I urge the government to prescribe this merciless regime with utmost priority. I'm aware that we've already placed sanctions on individuals, but we must go further. Until we start cracking down on the IRGC, they will continue to extort and suppress innocent people. Iran will only feel the pinch with full prescription, and I reiterate my plea to the government to do so. Hezbollah is already prescribed. That's their birth child of the IRGC. Therefore, the IRGC must be too. So to oppose the Iranian regime is no longer a political calculation, but a simple humanitarian choice. We must support the Iranian people and acknowledge the legitimacy of the Iranian opposition if we're ever to see a free and democratic Iran. I've unfortunately had to leave, but I hope that we'll get excellent replies from my honourable friend the Minister and indeed from the opposition.